long time ago, my grandfather, Harry John Score, fired up my imagination and instilled in me a deep love for history with countless stories of his past. Now, I am a grandfather with stories of my own to share with my granddaughter, Hannah. Oh, and now, with the help of the World Wide Web, I can share them with you. Simple little tales of life from years and years ago. As of the time of this writing, early March 2021, I am almost a month away from being 71. And in those 71 years, I've been known by more names than Santa's good boy and good girl list. Or would you rather I say good girl and boy list? I'm amenable either way. It's a good thing I never took any of these names seriously. By now, I'd be suffering from a serious identity crisis. It all started before I was born. After having two sons, my parents thought it would be nice to have a daughter. They were so hopeful of that possibility, they chose to name her Robin. Then I came along as me, a bouncing baby Bob. That was one of the few times in 70 years I went by my given name. At least that's what's on my birth certificate. Shortly after, the ball got rolling with the misnaming thing when my grandmother Lippincott, that's the Lippincotts of the Crossroads store and restaurant at Scott's Corner, just in case you're wondering, she always called me Jimmy, the name of my next older brother. Never called me Bobby. At one point I wondered if she ever got the memo that my mother had a third son. Now that should have tipped me off right then that my life was going to be one name change after another for decades to come. Soon after came the first unwelcome identifier. Back in the 50s, although the town of Montgomery was primarily a farm community, in the class of kids in school I was grouped with, for some reason, I was the only farm kid. That made me the odd kid out. It didn't bother me, though. I was more than content being who I was. Actually, quite proud of it. Unfortunately, kids will be kids. I became known as the dumb farmer. At first, that bothered me, but maybe from being a farm kid, you learn to roll with the punches and overcome challenges. That's just what I did. In one of the first uses of my artistic abilities, I created a cartoon character called the Dumb Farmer. Practically, as they say, wore it on my sleeve. The town kids soon learned there was more to me than hayseeds and cow poo, and accepted me as one of them. Around the same time, we had a farmhand named Bob. To avoid confusion at home, he became known as Big Bob. After all, he was older and over 6 feet tall, and I became known as Little Bob, even up through my teenage years. Well, there was one exception to that. Whenever my parents or anybody else got angry with me, I was addressed as Robert. I got that a lot. Then in high school, I took Spanish. In that class, everyone had to go by their name in Spanish. There was another Bob in the class whose last name was closer to the beginning of the alphabet, so he got first dibs on Roberto. Since my last name came later, I had to be given a different name. I ended up being called Paco. That name stuck even outside of Spanish class. Believe it or not, 50-some years later, there are a few friends still calling me that. Then came college at Cobleskill. For most of my life, up until that time, for some reason, I was a lazy walker, meaning I rarely picked up my feet. I sort of just scuffled along. Within the first few weeks on campus, everyone started calling me Scuffy. One professor there had a different name, due to the way I walked. He called me Chester. For all of you not born in the 50s and don't know where that came from, you'll just have to Google it. It got to the point where no one knew my real name. On the last day at college, as we were all packing to leave, many of my friends had to ask me who I really was. That was May 1970. 3 months later, in August of that year, I started my first job off the farm at Valley Farm Supplies, a John Deere dealership in Walk Hill, New York. I was 100 miles away from Cobleskill, and no one from up there had any connection to nor knew anyone there at the new job. However, on the first day of the job, one of my new co-workers yelled from behind me, "Hey, Scuffy!" I asked him how in the hell he knew that name. He says to me, "I just watched you walk across the floor. How in hell do you think?" Well, that name stuck with me for the next 20 years. In 1972, I got married. Some of you might remember All in the Family was a popular TV show at the time. Well, I'm quite sure I wasn't the only son-in-law to be called Meathead, but my father-in-law thought it was funny. However, there was another moniker my in-laws adapted, one much more entertaining to them. I had a notorious penchant for getting under my wife's skin while visiting her family. Nothing I did was mean or vicious, but definitely annoying. I just couldn't help myself. A constant response from her was always, "Damn you, Bob." So much so that her family and neighbors soon began to address me as "Damn you, Bob." In 1986, I began an 11-year stint at Devitt's Agway in Newburgh, New York. The title of Scuffy followed along with me, but was beginning to fade away. Finally, after far too many years, I was back to being Bob. However, that lasted barely a year. It turned out I was not the only Bob at Devitt's. In fact, there were 4. Whenever the store PA system called out for Bob for a phone call or some other reason, all 4 Bobs responded. Things got a little confusing. The solution was to call only one of us Bob. The other 3 either had a prefix added to their name or, in my case, I got called something else. By then I was sort of used to it. If you look at my drawings closely, you'll see I signed them as Robert Harry Score Sr. My boss, Jim Devitt, knew about this and about my grandfather. From that point on, I became Harry. I had absolutely no problem with that. I was very close to my grandfather and was honored to go by his name. For the next 10 years, my new name took hold, and I and the rest of my world pretty much forgot about Bob, and I became Harry. Then in 1997, my name morphed one last time. I went to work for Rosedale Nurseries under the supervision of my old pal Paul Henke. Surprisingly, he was one of the few people over the years who continuously called me Bob. But by then, I was so used to being Harry, it became natural for me to introduce myself as such. Once again, confusion arose over just who in hell I was. That is, until one day, I was alone in the office when the phone rang. I answered it. It was Rosedale's owner. He recognized my voice and was aware of the confusion, so he asked, "Is this Harry or is this Bob?" For some stupid reason, I answered, "Well, which one do you want?" There was a far too long silence over the phone. Long enough for me to think to myself, damn, I'm about to get fired. After an eternal 5 seconds, I heard a chuckle. Then followed a good-natured discussion about middle names. It turned out he went by his middle name too. All was good. Except for the next 23 years, my official name at Rosedale was Harry Bob. Today, I am retired down here in Florida. All my pseudo names are now pleasant memories of the past. Now, I am just Bob, or Dad, or Papa. And every once in a while, I hear, "Damn you, Bob." And that is not exactly years and years ago.